So my name is Tony Gonzalez, and we are here talking to Kip Winger, who is going to release a new CD called Seven. How are you, Kip?
Good, man. Thank you.
What were you doing since your last recording, Better Days Coming?
Better Days Coming came out in 2014, and we were very busy touring that for about a year and a half. And then Reb Beach was in Whitesnake, so he was touring with Whitesnake a lot. And I wrote a musical called Get Jack, and that took me about 3 years. And then I was also doing my classical music. I had several pieces written, orchestra pieces written, and just doing, quite a bit of orchestra work and a lot of solo gigs and some winger gigs. So I've written a lot of music since the Better Days Coming album, but not with the band.
And taking account this new CD called Seven, are you the main songwriter here?
Reb Beach and I are the main songwriters. We write mostly everything together. There's a couple songs on there that I wrote myself, but for the most part, it's Reb Beach and me writing all the material.
Who brings all the guitar solo?
So Reb Beach played all the guitar solos except for Time Bomb, which was John Roth, One Light to Burn, which is John Roth, and Broken Glass the solo was played by Paul Taylor, which was the first time Paul's ever played a solo on a Winger album. So it's worth mentioning that the album is all original members and everybody played on every single song. So it's a pure mixture of all the Winger elements all in one album.
Now that you mentioned this, it's really lucky that you are with the same regular lineup. And tell me, how were you organizing your professional life to do the recording, all of you?
Well, I have a studio in Nashville, so I fly Reb to Nashville and we work, and then everybody comes to Nashville to do their parts. I don't like to make albums through the telephone or on Zoom or anything like that. I feel very strongly that I need to be in the room with the musician, having this visceral connection, rather than letting people just go home and play their part and go, here you go. It doesn't work for me. I like to make it all gel, make it all sound like it came from the same consciousness, the same place.
There is a song in the CD I consider that is a hit, that is Resurrect Me. And there are some moments that the song reminds me Kiss, the music of Kiss. Yes, could you tell me about the song?
Well, that was one of my favorite ones we wrote in the very beginning. It was super high energy, and I just was like, kind of bring me back to life feeling. And so, but it also could be about an old car that you fix up and resurrect. But yeah, we wrote that very early on in the process of writing this album. And super high energy, and like I say, it made me feel like a song that brings you back to life.
I remember your story. I remember something. The last song in this CD, I consider is an extraordinary song. It all comes back around. Why it all comes back around is the last song, taking account that is extraordinary. Maybe you don't see it like a very good song, or maybe yes.
It's my favorite song on the album.
Yes.
Traditionally speaking, Winger puts a song on the last song on an album with a very long guitar solo at the end. We did that with Headed for Heartbreak on the first album, and this is kind of like a new Headed for a Heartbreak. It's a very special song to me. It has a lot of elements that are very true to Winger, but it's got this new feeling to it. And Reb's guitar solo at the end is extraordinary, and it has some of my orchestral elements in the middle of it. So I'm very proud of that song in terms of the arrangement and the message, and one of those lucky ones that worked out better than I thought it would have. So like I say, it's my favorite song on the album.
Heading for a Heartbeat is in the first Winger CD.
Yeah.
And when I listen this CD, it reminds me Dog and Butterfly from Heart, but not because you sound like Heart. Dog and Butterfly ends with a song that is spectacular, that is called Minstrel Winds. And then when you do the same, and finish with Heading for a Heartbeat, say, wow, this is extraordinary. In that moment, when you release your first CD, did you or the record company knows how powerful this song could be, part of your life?
No, there was one man who knew that. His name was Danny Bush. And he worked, we were on Atlantic Records, and Danny Bush was one of the radio promoters at Atlantic Records. And he was the one who heard that song and said, this is the song that will set these guys apart. He was the only one, and he had to fight to make it a single. Thank God for Danny Bush, because nobody at the record company knew it. Now, it was one of my favorite songs. And it's still to this day one of my favorite songs. Ironically, I wrote Headed for Heartbreak by myself, and I also wrote It All Comes Back Around by myself. That's a Kip Winger song. So it is, and it's very strange that we've done this, cyclical thing all the way back to the beginning. But to answer your question, only one person knew that, and we are very lucky for him to really push to make that a single, because it really stood out on the radio back in the day. That it was like, very different from everything else that was out at the time.
The first time I saw the video, Heading for a Heartbeat, it was on the Cuban television. I said, wow, they take it as a single. They knew it. And it was really an extraordinary song. But in your case, you were lucky. Yes, and now it's part of your life and part of the life of a lot of people.
That's really nice to hear. Thank you.
You had other singles for this, the first CD.
Madeleine 17.
Madeleine 17, but Heading for a Heartbeat was like more, I think, stronger or more serious. Yes, it was really, really the best song from this CD.
I agree.
Yes, I remember those moments. You take a great success. It was in 1988, after being considered one of the hardest bands in the scene in 1988, were the 90s really hard for the band? Sure.
I mean, the 90s were the onslaught of all the grunge coming in, and the downfall of the 80s and all the things that I was singled out personally for. It was a very difficult time. There was nowhere to even play a gig. So, we disbanded. We never really broke up, but we went our separate ways. But for me, I learned how I recalibrated the way I think about music, and I did 3 solo albums. As an artist, personally, as on a personal level, it expanded my consciousness tenfold. So although it was a very difficult time, I would say that for me, it was a good thing, because I was able to spend time on developing the kind of music that I was capable of. And had that not happened, we'd be on the kind of hamster wheel of producing the same album over and over and over again, because it's a brand and you have to stick to the brand and, go out and do all the shows. And there is something great about that. But in my case, it wasn't my destiny. So, like I say, a hardship turned into something clearly what I needed to do to develop the other side of my musical journey.
Interesting. But before Winger, you have a story, but there was a band called Vice Versa.
Yes.
Yes. Was Vice Versa the genesis from Winger?
Yeah, it was. It was largely my solo material, and I met Reb Beach and then brought Reb in to play guitar on my songs. And that is where the beginning of the Winger sound happened. We had a different drummer named David Rosenberg, and we were like a three-piece band. And yeah, you're 100% accurate. The sound of the band began at that point. Now, right after that, I moved to doing the Alice Cooper gig, which I did for about a year and a half, and then met Paul Taylor and started seeing, okay, I can put a band together with him. I got Reb in New York, and find a drummer, and that's kind of how Winger developed. But without Vice Versa, I would have never known that sound could exist, so to speak.
Reb Beach was in Vice Versa due to, and why did you decide to change the name and put Winger?
That was not my decision, to be honest with you. That was because we were calling the band Sahara.
Mm.
And if you look at the first album cover, you'll see down in the bottom right corner, it says Sahara. And so the record company missed the fact that the album was actually called Sahara. They just thought it was self-titled album Winger, but it was actually Sahara. The name of the band was Sahara, but the name was trademarked, so we couldn't use it. And we were basically out of time to come up with a name for the band. And the president of Atlantic Records suggested Winger. And to be honest with you, I never liked that name. I did not want it to be a band after my name, because it was very much a band. It's not just me and my band, it was really a group of guys that have a band, So, but fate as it is, we ended up being Winger, and so here we are.
Let me tell you that even in Cuba, there was a Sahara band. The music that you did under your own name, don't you think that it fit in Winger, the band?
No, it's totally different. When I do solo albums, they're very experimental, and when you talk about Vice Versa, the before Vice Versa, all the Vice Versa music was, and before that was all this solo music that I was doing myself that was much more like European prog pop. It was like Peter Gabriel meets Naked Eyes, or Duran Duran, more sophisticated pop music was what I was doing before I met Reb. And so I have this whole other side to me that has nothing to do with rock music, The rock music came back to me when I got together with Reb. And before, because I grew up in a band with my two brothers. Mm-hmm. And we were a four-piece band. It was us three, and one other kid from the neighborhood named Peter Fletcher. We had a band called Blackwood Creek, and we were very much a rock and roll band. I mean, it was like 70s rock. And so I came from this rock and roll base, and then I grew into this kind of Euro pop, progressive pop thing. Went back to my rock and roll roots basically when I joined Alice Cooper. And after Alice Cooper, Winger was born, and it was very much rock band. I was a huge Kiss fan, and but I also wanted musically to be more than that. I wanted Winger to be like a cross between Kiss and some of the 70s prog bands like Jethro Tull or Yes or something like that. We were never quite that progressive, but we had Rod Morgenstein in the band, who's a very progressive drummer, and we did some things that were a little bit unusual, so to speak.
Now that you mentioned Rod Morgenstein, he was an ace in your band, an extraordinary drummer. How did you get in the band?
So Reb and I were recording the demos for the band. A person named Eiichi Naito from a company called Amuse America was kind enough to let us use his studio to record demos, and he was thinking that he might be our manager. And he managed a band an artist named Kitaro, who's a Japanese new age artist. And Kitaro was looking for a drummer for a tour. And the Dixie Dregs had just disbanded. And Rod was looking for a gig. So he answered an ad for a gig, and he came to meet Aichi at the office that we were doing demos. And so he's talking to them about Kitaro, and he hears Madeleine coming from a room back in the back room. And he says, "Oh, what's going on back there?" One of the employees said, "Oh, there's a couple guys making demos back there. Would you like to meet them?" Rod comes back, and Reb and I are in the studio. And Reb Beach was a huge Dixie Dregs fan, like freaked out when he met Rod. He was freaking out. I had never heard of them. I didn't know anything about them. Reb was freaking out. Like, it was like, okay, well, he'd be, oh my God, it'd be so cool if we could get him on our album, And so we kept his phone number. And when we recorded our album, we asked him if he wanted to play on our album. Hey, do you want to be in the video? And do you think you want to go on tour? And then, he was in the band.
Now that you mentioned Madeleine, please tell me, during the period where you are playing alone as Kip Winger, does the people from the audience don't yell Madeleine 17 or things like that?
Well, yeah, no, I do all the Winger songs when I play my solo stuff. And by the way, I only play with my acoustic, I play with my acoustic and a percussionist. So, yeah, I play all the Winger hits. Everybody wants to hear me sing those songs, so no problem.
I'm glad to hear that, because I have never seen you alive, but I still have the feeling that I will have the opportunity to see you playing alive, and I would like to see you playing, heading for a Heartbreak, for example.
First of all, I know you're Cuban, but you're living in Madrid. I love the fans in Spain. The fans in Spain are incredible. I've played so many shows, and I haven't been there in a long time, but I played a lot of shows in Spain, especially solo, and it's the greatest audience ever. I love the Spanish fans. They're incredible, man. If there's a chance that I can come to Spain and play, I will absolutely do it. Economically, it's been very difficult for bands to tour Europe from America because it's super expensive.
So you mentioned Alice Cooper twice. I remember that you were recording Constrictor and Raise Your Fist and Yell. And tell me, how did you get the position in the band?
I was friends with the producer, Beau Hill. I'd known him since I was 16 years old. I think actually my band with my two brothers that I mentioned earlier, he produced a demo tape for us when I was 16 years old. It was probably the first band he ever produced. I became very good friends with him and he was kind of like my mentor. I'd worked with him for years, and when he moved to New York and he got the opportunity to produce Rat, and Rat took off, and so he was producing all these people. Was producing Alice Cooper, and they needed a bass player for 4 songs on an album. And Beau called me and said, "Hey, we need 4 songs done. Come up here and play the tracks." So basically, it was Beau Hill that got me the gig. When I played bass on it, I was a huge Alice Cooper fan, and I mentioned to Alan, Kane Roberts was in the band, and Kane was actually the one that told me to mention to Alice, if they go on tour, to consider me, and they did. So they called me up and asked me to be in the band. So that was extraordinarily cool, because I was such a huge Alice Cooper fan. I knew every one of his songs,
There was maybe you did, maybe you don't. I don't, but some people decide to split the Alice Cooper career between the Alice Cooper group and Alice Cooper. So in your case, did you feel that it was really so different?
Yeah, I was a big fan of the original band. Dennis Dunaway, to this day, is one of the biggest influences on me for bass playing. Dennis Dunaway and Mel Shocker from Grand Funk, those 2 guys, and Dale Peterson from James Gang, and Paul McCartney, of course, and Geddy Lee. But I was a big fan of the Alice Cooper, Glenn Buxton, and Neil Smith and Dennis Dunaway, and what was the other guy's name? Michael. I don't remember his name, but I felt like, the original chemistry of Alice Cooper was that band. So I was well aware that by the time I got into the band, especially that was all after the Welcome to My Nightmare with Dick Wagner, and after he left, after he went off on his own, we were even a further incarnation of that. So that I never felt like hey, I'm part of Alice Cooper's band. I always felt like, hey, they hired me to play bass with Alice Cooper, there was never a question about that. It was a great honor to be there. And I, was just hoping that I would represent the bass parts, as well as I could. And part of the reason that they hired me was that I could sing all the high shit, So, I gave it everything I got. And, that was fun days, man.
The songs that you play the bass were songs from Constrictor. And in case of raise of your fist and yell, did you participate in the writing process or only play it?
I did co-write some stuff in there. I'm listed on a couple songs, and I don't remember which ones they are, to be honest with you. But I wrote the neoclassical piano part for Gail. They were nice enough to let me be in on a couple of those tunes. But it was mostly Kane and Alice, that was their thing,
Now, I read, and to me was really interesting, that you were playing with Ken Mary a few weeks or so. Anything happened, but how was the experience of working with such a good drummer as Ken? Because to me, Ken Mary is one of my favorite drummers.
Me too. And Ken Mary he's absolutely incredibly talented, one of the best rock drummers out there, without a doubt. And so when I got hired in Alice Cooper, Kane and I were the two guys in the band. And it was up to Kane and I to audition drummers and keyboard players. And we auditioned all these drummers, and then Ken walked in and played, and it was like, you got the gig. Like five minutes in, we're like, okay, you're the guy, And Ken is extraordinary. He's a great drummer. I can't say enough about how good he is, and still a good friend to this day. He's fantastic.
Have you listened to Ken playing now with Flotsam and Jetsam, or it's not your kind of music?
It's not my kind of music, but I do appreciate it, and I have seen that on Facebook posts and YouTube and stuff. And it's ridiculously great. It's just awesome. And Ken deserves that and more.
Even when you have 3 singles with the first CD, a great moment was when the band gets a tour supporting Scorpion. And tell me, how was the experience supporting Scorpion? And if there any special moment you remember from that tour?
Well, the first gig we did, we were terrible and they wanted to fire us.
No.
Because we had never really played together. Although all of us had done gigs, hundreds and thousands, 1,000 gigs easy. Separately, we'd never played as a band before. And our sound was terrible, but we got it together, and finally, they liked us. So, but they didn't like us at the beginning, and anyway, so that was a great tour. They took us out for a couple months, and then they took us out in Europe for several months as well. It was very, we learned a lot on that tour because, they had already been very well established and had been doing it forever. And so for us, it was a great opportunity. And, Klaus Meine is a great front man. So for me, it was fantastic to just, watch him and steal some of his stuff.
Your brothers, Nate and Paul, are they still working in music right now, or they decide to take another way in their life?
No. Well, my brother Paul works in music. He sings and produces and mixes a little bit for some people here and there, not very much, but and he still writes songs. And my middle brother Nate passed away 2 years ago, so he's no longer with us.
Sorry to mention that, Kip.
No problem, no problem.
Yes. So we are coming back to another part of the story, because I read that the first song you wrote or co-wrote was Bam Bam, recorded by Kix in the album Midnight Dynamite.
That's another thing, Bo Hill. That was my first published song, and he was producing, in my opinion, his best production, Midnight Dynamite by Kix. And they were looking for material. I had some songs, and I pitched them the music for Bang Bang. It was a different song at that point, but they loved the music, and they took the music and rewrote the words. So yeah, I wrote the music to Bang Bang. Yeah, that was my first published song.
We will remember that you were playing with Alice Cooper, your own band, but to me was interesting when you participate in the recording of the Grounded is the name of the CD, Grounded, and the musician is Sen. I don't know if I mentioned really good, Eroglu, the Turkish musician.
Yeah.
There was a moment that I imagined that you met that musician when you were in Egypt, but no. And tell me, how were you convinced to work with him in Grounded?
Grounded came after I worked with his name's he pronounced his name Jank.
Yeah.
Like Jack, but Jank. When the internet first began, he sent me a whole bunch of emails with some of his music on there, and I was really blown away by it. And so I just got on a plane and went to Istanbul, and I spent many trips. I took many trips to Istanbul, and we worked a lot on a lot of music. And you can hear all that in my third solo album, Every Story Told, Nothing, Reason to Believe, In Your Eyes, Another Life. I'm sure there's more that I'm forgetting. We produced those songs and wrote them together. We worked a lot on a lot of music, actually. And then after that, he assembled the material for the Excarnation record. So, we had already worked together a long time, and he's like my brother. I mean, I'll play on pretty much anything he's working on, and I always have him. I brought him to help me with Winger 4. I call him all the time, and we work together a lot. So he's one of the most talented individuals that I've ever met, and he's got 2 sons that are beyond talented. So it's a whole musical family that's just incredible.
In 2002, you were briefly working with Alan Parsons as a live singer. Only live singer, or you play the bass? And how was the experience? Because for some musicians, Alan Parsons, Dark Side of the Moon, the Beatles, so wow, he's a huge musician. Tell me, how was the experience? And the bass player?
No, I only sang. I was the lead singer for his first American Alan Parsons live project. That was one of the greatest honors of my whole musical career. I got a call from Alan. It was around 2003, and we had both met each other playing another gig, a charity event, and he called me out of the blue and asked me if I'd like to sing for his band. Yeah, and that was a great honor, and he's so talented and such a beautiful dude. I mean, Alan Parsons is the nicest guy that you'll ever meet. He's so nice and so talented and so huge, as you say. He was working on Beatle records, for Christ's sakes. He's one of those guys, like super royalty of rock. So, I was very honored to have that experience. And, we're still friends. I can't say enough great things about him. He's just fantastic.
All these periods, I imagine that you change your bass gear, the equipment a lot, or you are still playing with the same instruments?
Pretty much the same. I use Spectre basses, and they're the best for what I do. And Ampeg, SVT. I either SWR or SVT, but mostly SVT, Ampeg. And I just plug my bass right into the amp. I don't have pedals and do all that stuff because I'm not that kind of. I play bass and sing. That's what I do. I don't play like Billy Sheehan. Who's a great bass player and way better than I'll ever be. But my thing is like fronting the band and singing, and playing the bass. And so, no, I haven't changed my gear much at all. It's been pretty consistent.
And when you were singing in Alan Parsons project, do you feel strange without the instrument?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Definitely.
How did you manage this?
You just get up on stage and you just do it. You don't think about it. You just get up there and do it. I mean, there's nothing there's nothing to do. You sing and then you stand there and like try not to feel weird.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate this conversation. As you can see, I studied your story.
Hey, you know what? I really appreciate the fact that you knew as much as you did and took the time to speak to me about all this. It's very gratifying. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kip, for your time.
Thank you, man. Have a nice day. Hopefully we'll play there sometime soon.
Yes, if you come to Madrid, I will try to see you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Night. Bye-bye.